Hi, my name is Sudhanshu and I'm currently shooting in someone's terrace right now, and today is the first episode, and I wanted to cover something incredibly basic yet foundational. See, every time I travel, every time I'm going out in urban and rural India, the one question that I always have is, what is a youth? And that question has such a diverse strain of answers. I'll get something from a state of mind, that you're active, that you're fit, or something when we're talking about age bracket wise, as small as young as 10 years old to as old as 65, 60. And when we're thinking of youth as something so fluid, that comes at the expense of the actual age bracket of young people. See, we can't prescribe policies, we can't implement those policies if the age of youth is so fluid and so diverse. Now, this has been a hypothesis and something that has concerned the United Nations from the 1970s, the International Year and Decade of Youth. Since then, they sat down, had a lot of meetings to discuss what is a solid definition of a youth. Now, it's important to note that India didn't send anyone during that year or the several consultations that took place. But the United Nations and its affiliates have come to a conclusion over the past 3-4 decades that the age bracket of 15 to 24 is an official definition of a youth. Now, that's accepted by most UN affiliates and UN prescribed countries. So international standards, that's a basic. It's important to note also that some UN affiliates, like UNESCO and WHO, go by their own age definitions because they have different policy prescriptions that they need to apply. That being said, the international definition is standard from 15 to 24. One country, one of the very few countries that doesn't prescribe to that definition is our very own India. See, India had a definition after severe pressure put on it from 15 to 34. Now, this was accepted in 2003, 15 to 34. So basically, you could be a child of 2 and God knows what else, and still be considered a youth, and those policy descriptions were being applied to you as well. In 2014, under, again, severe pressure, that age was decreased from 15 to 29. So we still have a different definition and a larger bracket than the definition of the UN. So for this and for our work that we do, we like to prescribe by the India definitions because we're working in India. So whenever someone asks you, what is a youth? It's an age bracket of 15 to 29 according to Indian policy and government data. Now we know what is a youth, it's time to think about how many young people there are. Because simultaneously as I think about what is a youth, the second question is, how many are there? And yet we have a lot of newspapers, news channels, journalists, politicians, academics giving us these very broad figures of how many young people there are in India. Half the country is young. But what does that actually really mean? When we think about the definition and we're pressurizing and focus and trying to make sure that we have a very strict definition as well as the numbers that are that make up of India, we thought we had to break down the numbers. So we went through the census data of 2010 because it's been that long since the next census is coming out in 2020, 2021. We went through the UN DP numbers, the UN Population Fund, and we realized that the numbers vary as well. But breaking them down, taking the age brackets up, we figured out that there are around 650 million people below the age of 29. 650 million. That's twice the entire demographic of the United States, which is the third most populated country. That's how many young people exist in India. Now, if you take the definition of what's below the age of 25, the UN definition, then there are around 600 million. Now, this number keeps changing, obviously, because the influx and deflux of populations, and we'll have a more strict and I think more realistic number in a couple of years when the next census data comes out, and we'll be able to give you a more strict and kind of updated number. But we like to say about 650 million, and those, by the way, are conservative estimates. So the next time that people question you and ask you what is a youth, or when a discussion of youth comes up and someone throws a very broad definition, please, please, please give them the foundational knowledge that there is a specific definition of a youth, and there are so many young people within India that they make the third most populated country just by themselves, by a long shot. Now, that's important for the policies that are being prescribed by the government and by international standards. See, again, like I said, if we don't have a very specific age definition, if we're not thinking about young people and India's youth specifically through these very rigid terms, then we leave a risk of policies being prescribed for a much broader audience, meaning that the prescriptions that are being in place might not be as advantageous to India's youth because they're being applied to a very, very varied amount of demographic. So next time, please be very specific. The first thing that we can do sitting at our home, sitting on Facebook, sitting on Twitter, social media, is have a discourse, a very specific discourse about what is India's youth and how many are there. Until then, we won't be able to even get to the policy, the representation, if we don't have the fundamentals down.